Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Thursday, January 23rd, 2025. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today, Zelensky wants U.S. troops in Ukraine. So Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that U.S. troops must be included in a Western peacekeeping force that he wants deployed to Ukraine as part of a potential peace deal with Russia. Speaking at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, Zelensky called for 200,000 European troops to be sent to Ukraine to uphold a peace deal. And this idea is a total non-starter for negotiations with Moscow. But Zelensky said in this speech, quote, "We need contingents with a very strong number of soldiers. From all Europeans, 200,000. It's a minimum. Otherwise, it's nothing," end quote. So that's a very sizable force, 200,000 troops. Then in an interview with Bloomberg following these remarks, Zelensky said U.S. troops need to be involved or the Europeans would not want to be part of this deployment. He said, quote, "It can't be without the United States, even if some European friends think it can be. No, it can't be. Nobody will risk this without the United States," end quote. So the Wall Street Journal reported in December that President Trump wanted wanted European troops to deploy to Ukraine to enforce a ceasefire, but the idea was quickly dismissed by Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, who said Moscow was certainly not satisfied with the proposal. And of course, one of Russia's primary motivations for the invasion was Ukraine's alignment with NATO. Their key demands, their core demands when it comes to a peace deal includes Ukrainian neutrality and a commitment for Ukraine not to join NATO. So the idea of Russia agreeing to 200,000 Western troops being deployed to Ukraine, it's just not in the realm of possibility here. And the Trump administration has said that its official policy is to end the war in Ukraine, and Trump has tasked his envoy to the conflict, Keith Kellogg, to do that in 100 days, but we really don't have a sense of what the U.S. might offer Ukraine. And this is showing, I think, that Trump's going to have to put some real pressure on Zelensky, maybe leverage some military aid. As far as we know right now, the weapons, everything Biden's approved, he approved so many different weapons shipments on his way out that probably for a long time, U.S. weapons are going to continue to be shipped to Ukraine, and as far as we know, those weapons continue to flow. So the next one here, Trump threatens more sanctions if Putin does not make a deal. So on Wednesday, President Trump called for Russian President Vladimir Putin to agree to a deal to end the war in Ukraine and threatened that if it doesn't come to an end, he will place additional tariffs and sanctions on Russian goods. So this is from a post on Trump's Truth Social account. It's kind of a long post, but I'll read the whole thing. With Trump, sometimes you really have to read or listen to his whole statement to get the context of what he's saying. So he said, quote, "I'm not looking to hurt Russia. I love the Russian people and always had a very good relationship with President Putin. And this despite the radical left's Russia hoax. We must never forget that Russia helped us win the Second World War, losing almost 60 million lives in the process. All of that being said, I'm going to do Russia, whose economy is failing, and President Putin a very big favor. Settle now and stop this ridiculous war. It's only going to get worse. If we don't make a deal and soon, I have no other choice but to put high levels of taxes, tariffs, and sanctions on anything being sold by Russia to the United States and various other participating countries," end quote. So it starts off saying he loves Russia, he's not looking to hurt them, but then he goes into this threat. And he said that no more lives should be lost in this war and said that a deal could be done the easy way or the hard way. So U.S. sanctions on Russia that were imposed under President Biden, they've done nothing to stop the war. and it was clear from the beginning that they wouldn't. These sanctions did not destroy the Russian economy as the Biden administration had hoped, and it's unlikely if there are any additional sanctions that Trump could impose on Russia that would make any difference. So this just isn't a good sign. I mean, if this is his leverage over Russia, then he's really got nothing. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said Tuesday that it is the policy of the administration to bring the war to a close, as I just mentioned. Just some things that I also mentioned in that previous article. But again, not the best signs here for the chances of a peace deal. You have Zelensky saying we need U.S. troops and 200,000, Western troops in total, and Trump threatening sanctions. So I think it goes to show there's a long way to go here. No sign yet of any meeting or summit between Putin and Trump, but hopefully that's something that happens soon. That at least they have a conversation soon. They both say that they're ready to talk. All right, so the next one here: more bodies dug out of the Gaza rubble. So Gaza's health ministry said Wednesday that hospitals received another 54 bodies of people killed by Israel's onslaught as Palestinians continue to dig remains out of the rubble. The health ministry said that 53 of the bodies came out of the rubble, while one Palestinian died of previously sustained wounds. The ministry wrote on Telegram, quote, "There are still a number of victims under the rubble and on the streets where ambulances and civil defense crews cannot reach them," end quote. The ministry said the recovered bodies have brought the death toll since October 2023 to 47,161. And as we've been talking about quite a bit, that is considered a significant undercount, likely by 41%, according to that Lancet study, which said the true death toll is probably over 70,000. And that is just people killed, just violent deaths. So each body that's brought to a hospital will be added to the death toll, but in many cases, rescuers are only finding bones that are buried, and then they bury them near where they're found. Basically, they pull them out of the rubble and bury them. So it's not clear if those are being counted. Hind Kudri, a reporter for Al Jazeera, said, quote, "In most cases, they are finding only bones or bodies that are unrecognizable. They bury them in areas near their targeted houses. This isn't a matter of several months. Many Palestinians have been trapped under the rubble for more than a year," end quote. You see this picture here. This is Rafah. I mean, look at this destruction. This is the southern city of Rafah, where President Biden said he would only support a limited incursion, a limited operation, but the entire city is completely destroyed. Kudri said that there are at least 11,000 Palestinians unaccounted for who are believed to be buried under the rubble. The rescue workers say they believe there's at least 10,000 bodies still under there. So another thing that happened on Wednesday, an Israeli drone killed a Palestinian civilian, and 4 others were wounded despite the ceasefire. And this was reported by the Palestinian news agency Wafa. And that report said, quote, "Local sources reported that an Israeli quadcopter drone opened fire on a group of civilians near a playground in the Al-Shabura refugee camp. The group was working on cleaning and clearing the rubble from their homes when the attack occurred, resulting in the killing of a 28-year-old civilian and the wounding of 4 others," end quote. So later in the day, the Israeli military claimed that it fired on a group of armed militants in southern Gaza and killed a Palestinian Islamic Jihad fighter. Not exactly sure if this is the same incident they're talking about, but if it is the same incident, 2 very different accounts. And of course, we haven't seen any evidence from the Israeli military to back up their claim. And we know from Israeli media that in Gaza, the Israeli military frequently kills civilians and counts them as terrorists. And according to my count, just from the media reports that I've seen, at least 4 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli forces since the ceasefire went into effect on Sunday. All right, so the next one here, Trump envoy says that it's good Hamas wants talks with the U.S. So President Trump's Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, said Wednesday that it was good that Hamas was open to talks with the United States. Witkoff was asked in an interview with Fox News about comments from Musa Abu Marzouk, a Hamas official based in Qatar. He said, the Hamas official said, quote, We're prepared for a dialogue with America and achieving understanding on everything, end quote. So in response, Witkoff said, quote, well, I think it's good if it's accurate. I think we were able to demonstrate that President Trump's policies, peace through strength, they work. Everybody listens, end quote. So just good to see, an official in the Trump administration, the guy who's in charge of this type of stuff, saying that it's good, basically saying that, yeah, the U.S. is willing to talk with Hamas. Witkoff's pressure on Netanyahu was seen as the key factor in getting Israel to agree to the hostage ceasefire deal, but it's unclear if the agreement will hold, as Israeli officials are threatening to restart military operations after the first phase. President Trump said on Monday that he was not confident that the ceasefire would hold, and when asked about the comments, Witkoff acknowledged that the implementation of the deal will be difficult. He said that he would be traveling to the region, including areas of Gaza controlled by the Israeli military, to monitor the ceasefire. He said, quote, I'm actually going to be going over to Israel. I'm going to be part of an inspection team at the Netzarim corridor and also at the Philadelphia corridor, end quote. So Witkoff, who's a real estate investor from New York, also said normalization agreements between Israel and Arab states were the key to peace in the region, although similar deals, these Abraham Accords that were signed under Trump, they did nothing to resolve the Israeli occupation of Palestinian territories, which is the cause of the conflict. So if they do more normalization deals, but there's no, the occupation continues, then, we're not really going to see these issues resolved. All right, so the next one here, over 20,000 Palestinian children orphaned by the war in Gaza. A very grim statistic. This article is from Dropsite News. So 11-year-old Mohammed Shar-Ara lies alone in a hospital bed at the Nasser Medical Complex. He is the sole survivor of 6 members of his family killed in an Israeli airstrike on their home in Khan Yunis last month, including both of his parents. Mohammed lost his left leg in the bombing. He is receiving treatment to recover and resume his life with a permanent disability, but has no one to care or provide for him. While Mohammed's immediate family fled south from Gaza City to Khan Yunis in December 2023 in a doomed search for safety, his other relatives remained in the north. Mohammed told Dropsite News, quote, losing my leg is not the biggest loss in my life. What hurts me more is that I want my mother. I don't want to live without her, end quote. And this is an 11-year-old kid. With the ceasefire deal that went into effect on January 19th, the Israeli airstrikes and attacks have, for the time being, largely ended. Aid has started to arrive. So at least 14,500 children have been killed. But this number, there's approximately 20,000 orphaned children who have lost one or both of their parents since Israel's war on Gaza began 15 months ago. Again, just a huge number. And more than 40% of the families in Gaza are taking care of children who are not their own. More than 40%. So there's just so many cases like this one boy. All right, so the next one here, Yemen's Houthis released the crew of a seized ship. So on Wednesday, Yemen's Houthis released the crew of the Galaxy Leader, a commercial ship the Yemeni group seized in November 2023. And this was part of its response to the Israel's war in Gaza, the genocidal war on Gaza. They started attacking Israeli-linked shipping, and they seized this one ship. Yemen's Al Masirah TV reported that the Houthis released the crew to Oman in coordination with Hamas as part of an arrangement related to the ceasefire in Gaza. The Galaxy Leader, which is it's a car carrier owned by Ray Car Carriers, which is a British shipping firm that was founded by Abraham Unger, who's an Israeli businessman. So it does have a link to Israel. And the 25-person crew includes mariners from the Philippines, Bulgaria, Romania, Mexico, and Ukraine. So they've been in Yemen for quite a while now. Moth Abu Shamala, who's Hamas's representative in Yemen, said, quote, today in Sana'a, we witness a manifestation of Palestinian victory in the face of the genocide endured by the Gaza Strip, end quote. So the Houthis have stopped their attacks on Red Sea shipping in response to the Gaza ceasefire, but they are warning they could restart if Israel does not uphold the deal. President Biden launched a bombing campaign in January 2024 against the Houthis in defense of Israeli shipping, but it only escalated the situation in the Red Sea and did not deter these attacks. And now we see the ceasefire happens, which is the thing that the Houthis said all along would get them to stop. We see the ceasefire happen, the attacks stop, and now they release the crew of this ship. So it goes to show how the key to calm in the region was a ceasefire in Gaza. All right, so the next one here, Israel committed to ceasefire but continues burning homes in Lebanon. So this article is from Jason Ditz. So the visit from a UN special coordinator to Israel has resulted in Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar declaring that Israel is committed to the ceasefire with Lebanon. The ceasefire calls for an Israeli withdrawal from Lebanon within 60 days and obviously the cessation of fire, which that hasn't happened on the Israeli side. So Sa'ar's comments would seem very hopeful, but come with increasing recognition in Israeli media that it is likely Israeli troops will remain in Lebanon beyond the deadline, which is just over 4 days away. Lebanese officials also expect delays to Israel actually withdrawing. So he's saying that Israel's withdrawal would be phased and according to security needs. What he did not address were the hundreds of overt violations of the ceasefire, including the aggressive military action that has continued in the south. So another one thing that happened on, Wednesday, Israeli troops set fire to at least 8 civilian homes. There was some home demolitions that happened, and this is something that's just happening every day, and they're still in so many of these villages, and just no sign that they're actually going to pull out within just a few days. All right, so the next one here, Israeli forces ravage infrastructure in Jenin. So this article is from The Cradle about the ongoing operation in the West Bank. Israel's deadly operation in the occupied West Bank's Jenin has entered its second day as troops continue to tear up infrastructure and reinforce their presence across the city and its battered refugee camp. Video shared on social media on January 22nd showed roads destroyed by the Israeli army's bulldozer. Israeli forces destroyed the road around Jenin Government Hospital and bulldozed the entrance at the medical facility, blocking it with mounds of dirt. Destruction was also carried out in the vicinity of Ibn Sina Hospital. Director of Jenin Government Hospital Wissam Bakr told Wafa news agency that the ability to transport wounded Palestinians to hospitals has been affected. The army has closed off the entrances to the Jenin refugee camp. Israeli forces are sending more military reinforcements to the city and the entrance to its refugee camp. The Jenin Brigade of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad movement's Quds Brigade said on Wednesday that its fighters were confronting Israeli forces with machine guns and explosive devices. So far, 10 Palestinians have been killed and 40 have been wounded in this attack, this operation, which has been called the Iron Wall. And there's a video of a Palestinian who was driving home with his wife and his kids. So Ahmad Shayeb was driving home with his family with him when Israeli snipers opened fire at the car. Video footage showed the final moments before he was killed. And over 600 Palestinians have been displaced from the refugee camp in Jenin so far. And the Israeli officials are making this sound like this is a very big operation and that they're going to Gaza, basically turn Jenin into Gaza is the idea here. All right, so the next one here, Trump's UN pick says Israel has the biblical right to the West Bank. So this article is from Al Jazeera. President Donald Trump's pick to be the United States ambassador to the United Nations has become the latest administration nominee to express the belief that Israel has a biblical dominion over the occupied West Bank. Eli Stefanik comment. This is Stefanik. Eli Stefanik. I feel like I'm messing her name up, but I don't feel too bad about it. But anyway, so she was in Congress, super pro-Israel, about as pro-Israel as you can get. And her comment on Tuesday came during her confirmation hearing before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, where she also pledged to further Trump's America First mission. But of course, it sounds more like an Israel First mission. She said during her open statement, that she would deliver this America First foreign policy. I think I saw Max Blumenthal make the point that she is essentially a second Israeli ambassador to the UN. That's how she will work. She's claimed that there's anti-Semitic rot in the UN, but basically, so she's agreeing with. She was asked during her confirmation hearing, do you agree with Smotrich, the finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, who's a total extremist, settler, long on the record wanting to expel Palestinians from the West Bank and annex it. She was asked, do you agree that Israel has a biblical right to the entire West Bank? And she said yes, which of course is just, this is not how foreign policy should be handled, with these religious views like this. And the thing about Stefanik or Stefanik, however you say her name, you have Mike Huckabee, who's an evangelical. And I know there's evangelicals who don't believe this. It's a specific strain, mostly the dispensationalism, this view that God has, the modern state of Israel somehow has the God-given right to this land. And that's something Mike Huckabee believes. He's an evangelical. And that is who Trump appointed to be the ambassador to Israel. Stefanik is a Catholic, and that is not a Catholic view at all. There is absolutely no Catholic teaching that the modern state of Israel has any sort of biblical right to this land. So the fact that she's saying this, I think it's almost even more, I said this on Twitter, it's almost even worse, because there's no religious dogma behind it. It's just she wants to advance her political career and has just decided to go all in on backing Israel and doing whatever they want. That's how she decided to get ahead, and it has worked for her. But it is just a bad sign that someone, even though the ambassador to the UN, she's going to be there vetoing any kind of resolution that Israel wants her to, of course. But I don't know how much impact she'll really have on the actual policy. All right, so the next one here, new Pentagon official wants a Middle East drawdown. So the Trump administration has appointed a new Middle East policy chief in the Pentagon who believes the U.S. should scale down its military presence in the region. Michael DeMono, a former CIA analyst who was sworn in on Monday as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East. So this is a good sign. Before taking the job, DeMono was a fellow at Defense Priorities, a think tank that calls itself the hub of realism and restraint and advocates for a less interventionist foreign policy. We run stuff from people that work there all the time. If you're familiar with Daniel Davis, who has a great YouTube show, which he didn't start that long ago, but it's really great. And we run stuff from him and a lot of other people there. And I believe we've run stuff from DeMono. And so I saw there's a report from Jewish Insider that said DeMono's appointment has alarmed pro-Israel Republicans due to his views on the region. The report cited comments that he made during a webinar last year where he said the Middle East does not really matter for U.S. interests. So he said, quote, vital or existential U.S. interests in the Middle East are best characterized as minimal to non-existent. And I think if you look at America's experience as the primary security broker for the region, it has not rendered any lasting political, economic, or security benefits in service of U.S. interests or the American people, end quote. So DeMono has opposed attacking Iran's nuclear facilities, and he's strongly against war with Iran in general. I linked to a clip there from when he was on Daniel Davis's show recently. And he's repeatedly called for the withdrawal of U.S. troops in Iraq and Syria, citing their vulnerability to attacks. When President Biden launched a bombing campaign against Yemen's Houthis in January 2024, DeMono opposed it, and he suggested that the U.S. should consider putting pressure on Israel to improve conditions in Gaza, since the Israeli onslaught was the reason for the Houthi attacks on Red Sea shipping. He wrote in Responsible Statecraft, quote, any multi-billion-dollar effort to fight a war in Yemen would render no political, economic, or security benefits to the United States. Strategies like buck passing and diplomatic engagement are perfectly viable. would do the U.S. no harm and could resolve the crisis. Continued military action in Yemen, by contrast, presents dubious prospects for success, end quote. And he is completely vindicated by that viewpoint over a year later, when the bombing campaign did nothing, only escalated the situation, and then the ceasefire deal is what calmed everything down. And he's someone I followed on Twitter, especially when I thought his analysis on Yemen, on the situation in Iraq and Syria was really good. And I don't want to blow up his spot or anything, but he also followed me and antiwar.com on Twitter, which is pretty cool. And now this is the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East in the Pentagon. So a good sign. I know it looks like Pete Hegseth is going to be confirmed as the Secretary of Defense. Hegseth, he's on record saying a lot of crazy things about his support for Israel. But I think he's going to be loyal to what Trump wants to do, because he wouldn't be in this position if not for Trump. So I think he's going to be very loyal. But the question is, what is Trump going to want to do? That's always hard to know. But Domino being put in this position, I think, is a good sign. And, when I say these things, people, get upset and say there's nothing good about Trump or whatever. But I think relative to what we had for the past 4 years, we can say that a guy like this being put in this position is certainly good. So good to see something like this. All right, so the next one here, where are we? You're fired. Trump dismisses Brian Hook in Truth Social post. So this is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. So President Donald Trump fired 4 presidential appointees that he said did not share his vision for America. And among those dismissed were Brian Hook, who served on the Trump transition team. So this is good because Brian Hook, and he had this whole long post and said, you're fired in all caps. So Brian Hook, in the previous Trump administration, he joined it in 2018, right before Trump withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal and imposed all these sanctions. And he was basically tasked with implementing what they called the maximum pressure campaign. So he's a huge Iran hawk. And it was concerning because the administration, the transition team, basically hired Hook to fill out some positions in the State Department. And there was all these, we saw all these stories that we covered about how the incoming Trump administration is going to be very hawkish on Iran, consider attacking nuclear facilities. And I think there's a chance some of these stories came from Hook. So Hook gets fired, I think, is a good sign. The State Department, I actually don't really know much right now about the lower level appointees. Marco Rubio, that is very bad that he's going to be heading the State Department, but maybe a good sign here that Hook was fired. He again, just about as hawkish as you could be on Iran, this guy. So good to see him getting the can. All right, the last story here. Taiwan announces naval training deal with the U.S. So last week, Taiwan's defense ministry announced it had signed a deal with the U.S. under which the U.S. will send military personnel to the island for a naval training program. So the U.S. has a history of sending personnel to train Taiwanese forces, but the training programs are typically not publicized for fear of provoking China. A source told Taipei Times that the announcement marked the first time that Taipei had officially announced a specialized training program with the U.S. The Taipei Times report said that the U.S. was changing its low-key and confidential training approach to a semi-public approach, testing political and public reactions. So testing China's reaction. This is very provocative. It might not seem like it's much, but these little changes, these things really irk China, things like this. And Taiwan's last president, Tsai Ing-wen, was the first to confirm the presence of U.S. troops on the island since Washington and Taipei severed diplomatic relations in 1979. That was part of the U.S. normalization deal with China. So Tsai, this is 2021. There was a report about U.S. troops training Taiwanese troops in Taiwan, and she confirmed it publicly. Again, the first time in decades that was confirmed. And now a few years later, we see the first public announcement about a training program. We've seen the U.S. military put out pictures of them training Taiwanese troops. And also, last year, Taiwan confirmed that U.S. Green Berets had been deployed to Kinmen County, the Kinmen Islands, which are this small group of islands that are only a few miles off the coast of the Chinese mainland. And Taiwan's defense minister essentially confirmed that when he was asked about reports. So that was very provocative as well. But this is just another thing following this pattern. And this was announced last week before Trump was inaugurated, but this is something we are certainly going to see continue, again, especially with Marco Rubio at state, these little steps to increase support for Taiwan. And China has been warning over and over again that Taiwan is a major red line that cannot be crossed. And the U.S. has been ignoring those concerns. And I don't see... Trump's been saying some good stuff about China, but again, this cabinet is totally stacked with China hawks. I mean, everybody's a China hawk. J.D. Vance is good on some things, but he's a China hawk. So this is an area I think we might see things ramp up. But at the same time, the Biden team was incredibly hawkish on China. They have really ramped up all the economic stuff, and Trump's going to be adding more tariffs on China. He really loves tariffs. And I mean, tariffs are the things that we have to pay for. So that's a big part of his whole economic thing. So I think we'll see more of this type of stuff with Taiwan, with the Trump administration. So that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from David Stockman: the entire Cold War was an avoidable mistake. One from Judge Napolitano: TikTok and the freedom of speech. One from Lubna Masarwa: how the Palestinian Authority became Israel's enforcer in the West Bank. One from Ted Snyder: Iran and Russia's friendship just got a lot deeper. They signed a new cooperation agreement. One from Leonid Rogozin: Biden's Ukraine disaster was decades in the making. So please go check all of that out. You could always support this show by liking, subscribing, commenting, follow us on social media. All that stuff helps out. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.